Alright guys, Murphs here, and today we're going to talk about this. A Ruger 1022 chambered in .22 long rifle. Now, in order to talk about this, we are going to have to talk about a little bit of history. Now, this rifle actually came out in 1964, and this was a kind of streamlined, smaller caliber version of a .44 Magnum semi-automatic, which has many of the same features. And we'll talk about those as we go along. Now, this rifle was originally produced to be kind of a more upscale .22. I don't want to say a gentleman's .22 or anything ridiculous like that, but it was targeted towards a more serious clientele. And as you can see, the overall lines are supposed to kind of replicate that of an M1 carbine. However, it is not a one-for-one, and we'll talk about that more as we go along. The inspiration is drawn from the M1 carbine, but its actual layout and operation is very different. Now, the 1022 would actually wind up becoming a cornerstone of the Ruger product line with, it's got to be by this time, millions of rifles sold. And Ruger, capitalizing off of that success, has actually done quite a bit with the design. Now, the .44 Magnum that this was based off of would fall out of the catalog in the 1980s. However, it's been replaced quite extensively by a wide variety of offerings with a 1022 basis. They make these in a takedown model. There are competition or precision type setups, hunting type setups, tactical or synthetic stocked Ruger 1022s. The company itself has come up with quite a wide variety of offerings, and the aftermarket has done the same, to where you can build a 1022 without having to buy a 1022. You can build it from the ground up, not unlike an AR-15. It is the AR-15 of the 22 demographic, I guess you could say. Now, there are also custom manufacturers who utilize 1022 receivers as their base and produce custom fit rifles for their clientele. Now, this isn't honestly a terribly historic firearm. The only other thing really left to point out is that these have been produced in 22 mag as well as 17 HMR. And again, the aftermarket production for these rifles is just completely ridiculous. Now, let's go ahead and get into this rifle's particular features. Now, as you can see here, we have a 16-inch barrel with a bit of a tapered profile to it. We have a blade type front sight, which has serrations and a brass bead set into it. I don't know how well you guys can make that out. Now, I do have another 1022 with me right here, which is actually the 1022 that I grew up with. The example that we're talking about today specifically is the wife's, but I thought it would be interesting to bring it up to show a couple of comparisons. And the first thing that's kind of different between these two rifles is the barrel band. Now, on this one, this being the new production, you can tell for our purposes here today because it has the lighter stock, whereas my rifle from growing up has the darker stock. This is a plastic barrel band as opposed to an aluminum one on this rifle. Just a little minor refinement that Ruger has instituted over the years, probably ostensibly to save weight, but in all reality, it's production cost. Now, this barrel band is probably the only thing that, in addition to how the trigger mechanism comes off of the receiver, these are the only things that really connect this to the M1 carbine. That and kind of the styling. That's about it. But it still evokes that image in the mind. Now, we also have a windage and elevation adjustable buckhorn rear sight on both of these rifles. Something that I found kind of interesting is that the elevation markings are on the left of this rear sight, whereas they are on the right on this older production rifle. Now, we do have this diamond set into the rear sight to kind of help you to know where to put the front sight, I guess. Now, coming back to our receiver, something that's very interesting about this rifle, on the original .44 Magnum, it was a stainless steel receiver and then a steel barrel, and that made production fairly easy. However, on the .22 version, they went over to a cast aluminum receiver, and still had a steel barrel. Now, the issue with that is that you cannot finish both of these at the same time. You have to finish these parts separately and then assemble them. And one of the big issues is when you assemble these two portions, you wind up scratching up and marring the finish on one of them, and nobody wants to buy a brand new gun with teeth marks on it. So, with that being the case, Ruger actually wound up developing a fairly simple design change for the installation of this barrel, and it was done for ease of installation. And this is a kind of dovetail type setup that doesn't require any actual press or turn-in fitting. Now, one of the great things about the setup is that it makes it really easy to uninstall the barrel and install whatever barrel it is that you want. So you could take this 1022, take off this fairly light profile barrel, and put in a heavy competition barrel if you wanted to. It's kind of interesting overall. Now, the receiver is tapped for scope mounts, as you can see there, which this rifle in the past for me has worn a scope for squirrel hunting. Now, we'll also note that we have our blowback operated system right here. This does have a right side charging handle on it. And on this newer production one, Ruger has added their name to the bolt. We do not have that on this older production rifle, which Ruger has really been taking great pains to make sure that you know it's a Ruger whenever you pick one up, which kind of annoys me, but that's a totally separate subject for another time. Now, the magazines on these rifles are actually quite interesting. So the Ruger originally would utilize a rotary box magazine, which is fantastic in a semi-automatic system with a rimmed cartridge. It's one of the key things. A lot of other rifles out on the market that have stacked ammunition for the 22s, excuse me, you'll have a tendency for the first and last round to kind of cant, and this can cause malfunctions, which in general, whenever you're talking about a repeating system, the magazine is going to be the thing that's going to cause you issues. Now, a lot of other 22s utilize like tubular feed magazines and all that kind of stuff, and those come with their own feeding issues of actually getting the round out of the magazine and into the chamber. But with this rotary type magazine, this winds up being a fairly consistent setup. The issue, however, is that you wind up kind of limited on ammunition because it's not very space savvy of an option. But fear not, here it is, lost it for a second. There are higher capacity magazines available out of the market. This is a BX25 magazine. They also have a 15 round capacity magazine out on the market. So you can get higher capacity feed sources to be able to go with these rifles. Now, also, the magazine release over time has changed. On my older rifle, you just have this kind of push button type setup right behind the magazine. Now, what was often changed up on these rifles by the end user was the installation of a little lever replacement on the magazine. See if you guys can see that there. This has now become a standard on Ruger rifles, which is pretty excellent. It's really not that hard to add this from the manufacturer. It was something that people wanted. Why not just go ahead and add it? And they finally did. Now, one other thing I would bring up about these stocks is that this stock has a couple of minor finishing issues. There's some rough edges left around the ejection port right here, whereas my older rifle, even with, I've got some scuffs and scratches on this particular stock, it does not have the same rough edges pretty much anywhere on it, actually. See here, I need to cover up those screw holes there, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. Now, on this particular rifle, well, on both of these rifles, we have a crossbolt safety set here in front of the trigger guard. However, the trigger guards and triggers are very different on these. This rifle, the newer production one, utilizes a glass-filled nylon for the trigger guard and trigger itself, whereas this rifle utilizes cast aluminum parts. Again, ostensibly to save weight, but Both of these are pretty comparably weighted. This is definitely a production refinement. All right, now you'll see here we have an excellent semi-pistol grip, which is my preferred on these style of rifles. And then we have a cupped plastic butt cap here at the end. All right, guys, that pretty much covers features. How does it shoot? These rifles are an absolute blast to shoot. They are so enjoyable. Of course, recoil is non-existent, and 22 ammunition is relatively plentiful, at least currently, and not as inexpensive as it used to be, but still more inexpensive than than the same number of rounds in a lot of other cartridges. Accuracy-wise, I have never been impressed with the accuracy of a stock 1022. And it doesn't take a lot to be able to increase the accuracy of a stock 1022. The first thing that I would go with would be the replacement of this rear sight with literally anything else. I'm not a big fan of this sight picture. It's never really done it for me. There are plenty of people who can turn in some fantastic accuracy results with this rifle. I'll go ahead and show and roll in some footage of what it is that I've been able to turn in with so far, but I have been relatively unimpressed with the accuracy of the Ruger 1022 in its stock format. Now, what is this rifle to me? Well, this is the wife's plinking rifle. The 1022 in the past has been a hunting rifle, but for the most part, it has been a plinker as well as an introductory tool to new shooters, be them youths or just people who haven't ever really been into shooting guns. Max, sorry guys, the cat's lonely apparently. So, the 1022 has been an excellent introductory tool for new shooters. And that's something that I would still use it for in the present. Now, I don't do a lot of small game hunting anymore, but if I went back to it, I would most definitely utilize a Ruger 1022 for that. Probably outfitted with a scope, as I have done in the past. Now, what do I recommend you guys use it for? Well, the uses that I've already listed are definitely excellent for pretty much anybody who's looking to have a reliable 22 rifle. And that is one thing that I will say for this rifle above all others, is that it is very reliable. Now, the 1022 as, say, like a suppressor host or something like that. For serious use, I'm not that impressed by the idea of using a 1022 as a suppressor host. For fun type use, or perhaps some very small varmint elimination, I could definitely see the Ruger 1022 serving well in that capacity. As a defensive option, in general, be it suppressor equipped or otherwise, I do not advocate for the use of the 1022. At the end of the day, if you shoot at me with a 22, I'm going to move because I inherently don't want to get shot. So I'm going to find cover. I'm going to try to break contact and, go on about my day. But this is not what I would use with the expectation of it being an effective fight stopper. This would be a last resort for me. And then, of course, for hunting uses on small game, you can't really overlook a 1022. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and have a good day.